Hello, and welcome to yet another episode of CTO Talks. My name is Dmitry Stepanov, and I am a co-founder and CTO of Glorium Technologies. Glorium Technologies is an international technology company, and we are hosting tonight's event. This is a video podcast for technical leaders and for those who want to become them someday. And we have guests who possess extensive experience in the area of technology. And tonight's guest is Stephen Johnston, CTO at PubWise. But before we start our discussion, please subscribe to our channel. We have lots of great content coming soon, including some future installments of CTO Talks. Now let's talk about our guest, Stephen Johnston. He is a founder and CTO at PubWise. 25 years of experience in online software. Stephen actually has a very unique perspective on the intersection of humans and technologies, and we're going to discuss this later today. He founded PubWise in 2016, right, Stephen?
Yes.
And I mean, basically, he focused on machine learning driven approach to programmatic advertising optimization. And Stephen, it's nice to have you on our podcast today. And tell us a little bit about your company first. Let's start with this topic.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for having me on, and looking forward to the discussion. So PubWise is a digital advertising optimization company. We, in sort of traditional terms, we connect people who are selling advertising to people that are buying advertising, and we optimize those communications between them. Whether that be open market bidding or direct transactions or deals or anything of that nature. But what we've built is a management platform for a new technology in the space called Prebid. It's an open source project that allows a lot of the auctions and a lot of those transactions to happen inside of the browser. And the change there largely for the industry was a lot of information that was previously bottled up inside of intermediaries is now available to publishers. And so we built technology and platform to help publishers leverage that. Primarily our differentiator is what we call our Spot Suite. It's essentially a series of optimizations for these transactions. And we have recently been granted a patent on the client side portion of that, which does demand path optimization, which is a lot of decisioning and modification of the configuration of different potential buyers is the easiest way to think about it. We're doing that while providing full transparency and observability is really our goal to our publishers. So we're taking that trend that's been in tech for a while around observability and surfacing important information and only the important information, not just a steady stream of useless data. And we're bringing that, into our space in advertising. And you'd probably be surprised by how little information is really provided to publishers historically. A lot of times they're involved in the transaction, but all they see is like final clearing prices or a check at the end of the month. They don't really see who was involved, why did they buy, what are the trends over time, and that sort of thing. And that's what we're working to provide people.
Well, you would think that in 2022, all this information would be readily available and readily used, but I guess not yet.
Yeah, it's. I mean, thinking about it, not cynically, it's hard to track this amount of information, and we're processing 300 billion transactions a month, and each of them outputs a certain amount of data, and it's not just like, did it succeed or fail, but it's who participated, what time of day was it, who participated, what was their relative bids, um, what were the aspects of the request. And so
Mhm.
there's a lot of dimensions with a lot of variability. And so you can't just sort of sum everything down to these nice, easy, summed up aggregated rows. And so, the challenge for us as a provider is the same as a lot of other observability platforms. So you've got this stream of data. What's relevant to the publisher or the person who's turning the knobs and flipping the switches? And so that's where we really started looking at machine learning and saying,
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, so but machine learning does help
yeah,
you to determine which switch
exactly.
actually should be used and what is
Yeah.
relevant and what's not relevant. Hmm.
Yeah. And so it's like, so we can take this and start to kind of, break it down into this hierarchy of, kind of only people can really sort of get these insights and intuitions,
Hmm.
or maybe it takes contracting, right? Like, we're not to the point yet where a machine learning algorithm or an AI is going to pick up the phone and do a deal with an external company. Only people can be involved in that. Um, you know, you're not yet at the point where AI signs a contract, right? And we may get there, but that's something that only people can do. And so we look at these big picture things, and then we start to deconstruct sort of the process and the domain of the problem, and then what is appropriate for machines. And I say that I want to extinguish all the business processes that only involve determining whether one number is bigger than another number, because that's a space where machine learning should just be doing everything. Um, so
Yeah, that's actually, I mean, I wanted to ask this question at the end, but it's kind of, I think, naturally is asking itself to be asked now. Is machine learning ethical? Well, I mean, artificial intelligence in general, and specifically in advertising, because you kind of taking some personal information and twisting it into the advertising. So, in general, what's your view on this one? How do you feel that you are in the middle of this transition?
yeah,
And in general, machine learning, what's your thought about this?
yeah. So we when we started, we were looking at the regulatory space. We
Right.
were looking at the um, consumer sentiment, the regulatory space, sort of what direction was the wind blowing in terms of
Hmm.
the kinds of questions you're asking. And I think that the question's a good one. And this often comes, you're asking it in the context of AI. In the
Right.
context of advertising, it usually comes up around, what is the role of data and privacy? And we have focused on building technologies that do not directly rely on user data.
I see. Okay.
And so we don't involve PII to make our decisions. We don't require special permissions in the context of GDPR and that kind of thing. So our decisioning is more about providing the information that other systems may use to do that kind of work,
Hmm.
and determining which of those provides value.
Good.
And I think this is where we get into the conversation of ethics, right? So, you know, ethics is sort of decisions of right and wrong, right? And I think that in advertising, the core of that has been that people have decided that it is wrong to use a person's data
Hmm.
without a fair exchange of value. And so we're looking at publishers and their role in that. And I think it's equally wrong for the industry to sort of hoover up all this publisher data and then reuse it over and over and over in the third party cookie kind of land space, space without providing value back to the publisher who originated it, or to the user who originated it, further. So I think you can be ethical, and I think you can be ethical in the context of all those things. You just have to be aware of where the boundaries are, and um, it isn't purely a legislative question. It's what is consumer sentiment and where's it going, right? So third-party cookies are on the decline, right?
Mhm.
We will have fewer third-party cookies, and I think that um, there will be some tail on them, and they've been kind of this. I call it the high fructose corn syrup of the ad industry, right? It's kind of easy. It goes over everything. You can add it to everything, and it provides some value. Um, but I see first-party data
Mhm.
and technologies that rely on that actually benefiting ultimately publishers who aren't just going for bigger audiences,
Mhm.
but instead are really participating in the value exchange. And I think
Gotcha.
I think that's where the question needs to be is you can't just remove everything, right? Like you could just you could just get rid of advertising, you could get rid of the free and open web,
And
you
we
could burn it
we
all
live in
down.
the real world. We must do advertising. We must
Yeah,
do some business
so
activities. So,
yeah, so I think it's a matter of um how do you convey to the customer what they're giving up,
right.
and then what are the technologies that actually allow everyone who's got a stake in that to steward it properly, to manage it, and that sort of thing. And so that's where we come into play is making sure that you're surfacing that data as a to the companies that provide you value back.
Mhm.
And if we can do that, um, then as more comes in terms of, well, we should be tagging it this way, or we should be controlling it this way, or we should be keeping it for this long, these things that are more sort of process and legislative oriented, um, then we're going to be able to rein that in instead of this kind of wild, wild west that existed with third party cookies. So,
Excellent.
um,
Okay. I think that's a good answer. Steven, I took a look at your profile at LinkedIn, obviously, before this conversation. And what struck me is your degree. It's a psychology degree. And at the
yeah,
same time, actually, what I noticed is that about, well, probably like second year in your college, you already started a business and it was IT related business.
yeah,
But you still, I guess, graduated with a psychology. So
yeah.
what's up with that?
Well, it was 1995
Hmm.
ish. The web was new.
Yes.
Um, the I originally was looking at electrical engineering. Got into psychology. I had always had a sort of hobby interest in programming. I mean, I started programming, when I was 12 or something, and um, but for whatever reason, the way that programming or computer science classes were sort of structured and the way the degrees were structured didn't really appeal to me. Um, and so I looked at psychology as what I wanted to do from a degree perspective. And I was interested in psychology. I became interested in test design. I became interested in things around AI and machine learning in a psychology context. I became interested in, are there future therapies around virtual reality experiences or AI interaction? So even as I sort of worked through psychology, I was sort of constantly pulled back to these questions of technology and the interactions of humans, in the context of what I was studying.
Hmm.
And so I don't think that certainly as an undergrad, I didn't learn as much about computer science as I could have, right? But I was super interested in technology. And so when I went and I started talking to the co-op program, and I said, hey, what can I do that's sort of at this intersection, right? And the answer was sort of, we don't have anything for you. And so I went to the IT department, and I said, what can I do that's technology related? And so I'll study psychology as an undergrad. I'll do technology more as a co-op thing, and then I'll find my own way to blend these things. And it took a little while, but I'm back there now, very much blending those things. And I
So
think,
it did help you
oh
at
yeah,
the end.
yeah.
And
I
you
mean,
would do,
I learned about like reading research papers, right? And so, if you read a crypto paper and it's got some math and some data in it, or you read an AI, approach to something, those are very similar to psychology research and that sort of thing. So
would you select a different degree if you would do it again?
I don't think so. Psychology for me was very natural. It fit into what became more of almost an entrepreneur kind of lifestyle in college, right? And so I went back to that same co-op program, and they said, we have this problem. We want to place 6-month co-ops, but people come to us all the time with 6-week projects. And so I said, well, and that's what you notice as far as starting a company. I said, well, why don't you give me the 6-week projects, and I'll start a consulting company while I'm in college. And so I basically started getting lead generation from the university for these projects that they couldn't put full-time students in. That cluster of things was so valuable to what I do now that I wouldn't want to change it.
Nice.
So
Not even in the, I don't know, business, for example. Well, not MBA, but something similar to MBA. What I'm trying to get right now, your perspective on the starting point, on the education, basically like advice for the future CTOs. What would you take again? Master degree,
I mean,
computer science, psychology, MBA, or it doesn't really matter? It's a university, you just learn how to think, how to do research. I mean, who cares?
I mean, I totally understand your point in the sort of the direction of your question. And I think that in general, for the average person, I might recommend an MBA or a computer science degree, and sort of in whichever way you lean.
Right.
But I think, and particularly if you want to go from a few years in school to a few years later, really starting on this sort of corporate progressive track into larger companies, right? My experience has been startups, and it's a much scrappier sort of approach, right? And so I'm not trying. If you're trying to sort of fit into the expectation of a job market and sort of what they're going to communicate back out to the job market, then clearly an MBA or computer science degree is going to align better. But I think that people who innovate are often synthesizers, and they're seeing trends across disparate things, and then at the intersection of them is where they find innovation and sort of future value that other people haven't seen yet. And so, people along divergent paths of anything are maybe more likely to stumble across those things. So,
But again, I guess it's about between enterprise material and startup material, right? It's a really different approach here to the
absolutely.
education.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Let's move on. Actually, multiple projects, from what I saw in your profile, they are related, they are presented as a highly scalable project. So basically, you have multi-million user system, high transaction system, and so on, so on. My question would be here, and I think a lot of people would be very interested in this. How did you grow your project from prototype to some production, pre-production, then scaling up, and then creating a highly scalable? I mean, I don't know any project that would be created highly scalable from the beginning, because I mean, you just need to invest so much money, so much time to make it highly scalable, and you do need to have some kind of path of developing of the project. What would be your advice based on your experience? How would you grow the project?
Yeah, I think So I've been through a few sort of evolutionary phases of
Right.
the answer to this question.
That's a
And
good
so
word.
if you don't mind me taking a little time to answer that, I think there's almost a couple of different answers.
Sure.
And
Um,
so the first app that we grew um, was pre-cloud,
mhm,
and there was a content management system for gamers in the World of Warcraft, gamers, guilds, clans, these sorts of things.
mhm,
Um, and at that time, we were growing so fast, we were ordering database hardware sort of ahead of time on these, you know, 3-month leads and 6-week leads and these sorts of things.
mhm,
So, we were there sort of calculating disk usage rates and, these kinds of things. Um, and I think that fortunately, that's probably not the kind of issue that most people are going to deal with now, particularly when they can leverage cloud technologies. And so, my first sort of thing in general, what I learned from that phase and what's still applicable now is that simplicity is really the starting point. As architects, and as the CTO, part of this is sort of an architecture kind of thing. We often have trouble differentiating between actual complexity and kind of manufactured complexity. And actual complexity is that some things really are hard. Some things really do have a set of steps. And
mhm.
we try to abstract these things. And some things, when you abstract them, what you've really done is just removed something, right? And abstraction always removes some sort of fidelity. And so if that process really is complex, you can't abstract it away. And if you're doing something interesting and innovative, you're gonna be working in some areas that have actual complexity. So you need to try to refine or remove the areas that don't, right? That don't have to. And so when you do things like we're going to start with 3 different types of data stores because there's some sort of abstract concept of perfection, right? Like we're going to go with Memcache and MySQL and a key store and this and that. And
Mhm.
when you add all of this unnecessary complexity, then what you're taking away from um, is bandwidth to deal with the actual complexity, which is ultimately what your customer wants you to solve. Um, and so I think that that's the key to sort of getting to the point of scaling, because what scaling is then going to do is start to stress those systems, and often in ways you didn't predict. I think that
Well, it comes with experience, but in general, yes, you cannot predict everything.
you can't
Yeah.
predict. And I say you can't predict. I think it's easy to point in the general area that something's going to happen,
Mhm.
um, but the exact sort of nature of it sometimes is unpredictable. If if you're going to just scale disk usage, like you're just saying, hey, we're going to do file uploads or something, then you
Mhm.
could think, well, we're going to stress disks. Well, it often ends up being an API between them, right?
Right.
Or some other service.
Right.
And so kind of like where the pressure is going to be, but when you think of it kind of like a river flowing, you don't know exactly which dam or is going to develop along the way or along that critical path. And often the answer to that evolves over time. And so if you keep things simple, I think that's step one.
Okay. Keeps
So
them simple. Yeah, that's
um,
good. I like it. I actually do follow the same stuff,
yeah,
same advice.
yeah, and I think the other thing is you sort of look at it's easy to sort of I talk about it like cadence versus goal. You're
Mhm.
building this vision. You've pointed something out in the future, and often the customers that you're working with, they may not be 100% on board yet with what you see as 3 years from now, but they're asking you to solve a near term problem. And I think
Yes.
that's the next element, and it's related to scaling. If you focus so much on being able to scale this thing you see 3 years in the future, but you forget the cadence of value delivery related to what your customers are asking you to do day to day between now and then.
Mhm.
Um, it's sort of a form of losing track of simplicity, but it's more about like understanding that there has to be a cadence of value delivery that is more fundamental to the customer than to the vision that they may not yet be fully on board with yet.
Yeah, but here I think we're stepping into the very interesting position where, yes, you need to do releases for today needs, but you might be swamped with the today's needs
Oh,
every
sure.
day for the next many, many months, and your vision will be gone. And I mean,
Yeah.
you will be late on the market. So
Yeah, and that's where
you
I was that's where I use sort of cadence, right? And
Mhm.
so we often deconstruct what we
Right.
need to deliver into relative proportions of core value, vision value, long-term value, and make sure that we're hitting a cadence on all those things.
That's
Um,
actually from your experience. When you do this balance, well, at least from my experience, it's very frequently I have to connect needs of the clients, for example, and visions of the developers, because developers, I mean, they usually focus it on the technology. They don't care about business. Business side, they care about business. They don't care about technology. And very frequently, it's a totally opposite directions. And you need
yeah,
to put it together and explain both sides. Hey, guys, we need to work it together.
yeah,
So,
and that's you're describing that struggle of sort of like what's a vision or a mission of a company, and then if everybody has a clear idea of why this thing connects to it, then
right.
that can be your touchstone across what you're talking about. And it's oftentimes technology people, it sounds so flighty, but it's really what allows you to say like doing this thing related to this core technology is related to the future business value of meeting a customer need that's going to increase signups X%.
Mhm.
And when you ask questions in that relation, then you get answers in that relationship, right? And so and I think you can train developers to think that way. Um, yeah,
It's,
and that's also team size, right? Like when you're dealing with a startup and you've got
Mhm.
4 or 5 developers, I think you want developers who are inclined to think that way more. As the team size gets bigger, you have a role for people who are just hyper focused on delivering a certain thing. Um, so
Um, what I didn't hear, I'm not sure if you actually had this experience. I mean, again, from the scalable projects, did you have experience of, again, developing it low scalable solution, then making some
yeah,
advanced steps and just dropping everything and rewriting, and then, I don't know, 6 months later, again, dropping everything, rewriting, or you have some kind of more proper way? How did you handle these two projects? Can you share your
yeah,
experience?
yeah. I think the first question is like, do you really have um, there's thresholds.
Mhm.
And if you're really talking about like 1 to 10 to 100 to a million to a
Right.
billion, that's like sort of this linear thing. If you're starting at a billion, you may find that
Well,
you
you
got to
start
go
with
a
a
little
million.
bit. Yeah.
Right.
And
But
so
did you start with 10 or you start with a million or billion? What
yeah,
was
and so
your experience?
I say that because I wanted to the I think that when you're talking about scaling like product usage, where you're talking about consumer purchase,
Mhm.
then then and we did that with Gamer Launch and Game Skinny, then you really can do the like build a prototype, get it going, find the stress points. Um, and that is a perfectly workable solution. And your focus should be on um, effective and fast, not on perfect. And that is 100% the area of perfect's the enemy of good enough.
Okay.
Where I think sometimes when you're talking about enterprise kind of connectivity, which I
Mhm.
think of more like what we're dealing with PubWise, where the initial volume is very high, then you have a different sort of starting threshold. And there you've got to get a little bit more serious about mapping out how big the volume will be, what its stresses are in the system. But you still just end up with another prototype at that kind of scale, and you're
Mhm.
still going to just end up with another point at which some of those things break down. And with new cloud technologies, we start with a lot of things where my recommendation to the team is like, if we can do this manually, let's just do it manually until we prove there's customer value. So when we talk
Mhm.
about like internal process, there's a lot of inclination to automate early. And I would recommend everyone to just, put the keyboard down, do it manually when you're talking about internal processes. And that's often where companies feel a lot of stress around scaling, right? Is these internal processes. But the problem is if you automate the wrong process, it's more detrimental than letting humans work through what the process really should be, and
Mhm.
then understanding that that once the person gets it right, once the customer is responding to its value, once what you've done manually is getting good response from the market, that's the time to automate it. And I think you can kind of do the same thing with software. Everything's a prototype, and when it's pre-scale, of some sort, and everything's a prototype forever. It's just, I think we always need to like remove this negative connotation of a prototype, right? Everything's a prototype of the next version you need if you're growing fast enough.
That's
Uh,
actually very interesting view. I love it.
so the and so we should just say that being a prototype doesn't mean it's not secure, that it's not safe, that it's not, business continuity isn't considered and that sort of thing.
It's up to the expectations, whatever expectations have of prototype, right? So
Yeah, yeah,
production is just more restrictive expectations. That's it. That's the only
yeah,
difference.
exactly. Yeah.
I see. Okay. Oh, that's very good. CTO. So do you consider yourself as a successful CTO?
Yeah, yeah. I
And
think
why?
I think so.
Because
Yeah, I mean that's sort of a tough word, right? Successful.
yes.
I think that um, I've built multiple applications. They've had good market response. They've been profitable. I think my goals are massive,
Mhm.
and I haven't achieved those massive goals yet. And so it's a process still. Um, in terms of sort of like why, I think that I would focus less on am I successful and more on am I able to sort of convey as I've grown the values that I have and sort of how we build the company and how we build the product. And am I able to convey that to the people that I'm working with? And I have become more successful at that, right? I've become more effective, I think, at just telling people the expectations of the group. And but leadership's tough, and motivating people's tough. And um, I'm often on small teams where I'm doing development and management, and the sort of push and pull of those two schedules and
Right.
expectations is very difficult. And so I think we can always improve. And I read a lot. I read a lot of books. We got a stack of books here that are sort of the current kinds of things.
Any
And
book you want to share with the audience right now? Something?
um,
Yeah.
yeah, so I'm actually reading a book by
Okay.
Stephen Kotler. It's called The Art of the Impossible. The Art of Impossible.
Ah.
Um, and he sort of talks through high performance behaviors, um, and a lot of things like I was describing earlier about researching a bunch of disparate things, um, and then looking at the edges of them and like reading a bunch of books and finding topics and then continuing to research those topics, a Wikipedia style deep dive on the world kind of thing. And then, a lot of times interesting businesses and interesting concepts exist at the edge of those things. And then exploring those. And he talks about flow states and things you can do to get into flow states, and things you can do to increase productivity. And so I found it interesting. It's one of those books where he describes more systematically some behaviors that I've always kind of done. And he fills in a lot of gaps, from research about, okay, if you're already doing these things, what do you add to that in order to improve productivity? So,
Gotcha.
yeah.
Steven, when you were describing yourself, how you became successful, actually, we'll come back to this question. You mentioned that you convey your values to the team. Do you mind sharing your values with the audience? If it's your
Sure.
personal, we can kind of skip this question because we
No,
didn't
no.
discuss it. But
No.
if you're okay, can you please?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of sort of phrases or idioms that are out there that I almost jokingly or wryly sort of refer to as. One is strong convictions loosely held, and the sort of relation is often wrong, never in doubt. And those kind of things I think about is like, I think it's really valuable to know what you believe and expressed with great optimism the likelihood of those beliefs coming true in the future. But there's got to be a background process where you're reevaluating new information all the time. And that's tough. It's tough for people. It's tough for smart people. It's tough for anybody. But it's sort of this mix of pragmatism and optimism. I value curiosity. I value a little bit of stubbornness. The old programmer joke about programmers being lazy. I think there is some value in a person who is stubborn, so they'll stick with something, but who values and understands removing those things in the long term so that they can get on to other challenging topics that they're curious about. And I think that when I was first hiring people, I often tried to hire like against my weaknesses. I'm not very ordered. I tend to be something somewhat abstract. I sort of thrive in chaos. And I used to think, well, what I need to do is find people who are really ordered, right? And they'll become the other leg of a stool. And I think in some team size, that makes total sense. What I've realized recently is that I drive those people crazy. And so I've really shifted to, understanding the value of people who also thrive in chaos. And that, there's a couple of things you sort of can't break, right? Like the old saying is you can't change the spots on a zebra. Like there's certain things that are going to be sort of part of the culture that because I'm here doing it, they're not going to change. And fighting against my inner nature is not fruitful. But finding a way to direct that to the goals is where it works. So a little bit of a meandering on that in terms of values, but I think pragmatism, optimism, and curiosity are the three big ones.
Excellent. Let's go back to what made you successful as a CTO. So, just kind of summarize your education, receiving psychology degree, obviously your continuous education. Even without asking this question, I know that you're continuously studying new technologies, new topics, new whatever, books every time, new releases, everything is on your table. I would assume that your childhood, at what age you said that you started doing development? 11?
11 or 12. Yeah.
11 or 12.
Whenever the Apple IIc
right?
came out. So
yes. What else can you add to this list?
I think just, you know, I constantly challenging yourself, or and that's sort of related to what you're talking about, sort of always learning. But um, you know, there's a lot of different CTO positions, and so I'm
Right.
really talking primarily from, my kind of role in startups.
Sure.
Um, it takes a lot of, um, sort of a lack of fear, in terms of, if you're growing something and you're doing something new, you've got to get over the idea that somewhere out there is some magical person who already knows how to do this. Yes,
Mhm.
there's people smarter than you. It's not important to think that you're the smartest person in the room. I'm saying that if you're truly doing something interesting and disruptive, then the reason it's interesting and disruptive is because 100 people haven't done it before. And so there may be a couple of people out there. There may be so I think it's important to find the people who are doing related things and are doing it in interesting and sort of innovative ways. And so we're talking about observability and machine learning inside of advertising. Um, it isn't being done in the way that we're doing it. It isn't being shown to publishers as much. So I'm looking for, what are other industries that are dealing with similar things, and what are they doing that's related? And I think that is an element of success, is like being able to go into other areas, learn about it, and then figure out which of those tendrils tie back. And that's, always been a skill of mine. So
And your curiosity and stubbornness, as you mentioned in the values, I think they fit very well into this puzzle as well,
sure.
right? Excellent. Well, couldn't agree more on this one, actually. I mean, you literally almost describing my my life and my style. Okay, good. One of the last questions here. I think we are running out of time. Your favorite technology, I don't know, favorite trend that you keep a close look at right now?
Sure.
I assume that something related, I don't know, machine learning, artificial intelligence, or something
Yeah.
else. What is it?
So the number one thing that I'm focused on right now is actually basically developer infrastructure. Um,
What is it? Sorry.
developer infrastructure, um, developer platforms, developer infrastructure. CI/CD is kind of in that same space. How do you get value to the customer, value to the product faster, more
Mhm.
effectively, more accurately? And we had sort of this Kubernetes, and it sort of goes across. So on the one side, I'm looking at things like code spaces from GitHub. Has really changed how we did development in, um, particularly in COVID, but then post, we're just keeping with it. We have large data sets. We have um, we have to deal with a lot of customer variability. So like large synthetic data sets, dealing with this in a remote capacity became difficult. So code spaces has helped us keep
Mhm.
the workers remote, but providing a common development environment. So a new developer can spin up our development environment in about 10 minutes now. And
So
it's,
basically improving, optimizing your processes, right? So
yeah,
that's kind of
yeah.
what is it, because of maturity of your company product, or it was induced by something else?
Um, you asked that question earlier about scaling,
Yes.
and um, there's two components of scaling. And so the first one is just what we all sort of know of, which is this sort of rate of growth of customers
Right.
and the volume they're producing.
Right.
But when you think of innovation, the S curve of adoption, and we've seen that as, the technology curve, the adoption curve, the S curve, the innovator's dilemma, they're all kind of related. Um, the the As you grow, the secondary needs of your user base grow. And those things have value. They have to be vetted. They have to be, it's really in some ways the reason your team grows. It isn't often because you're just doing more of the same. It's because secondary to more of the same, you're doing more second and third order things.
I see.
And so the later elements of scaling a company, not just this mainline, like handling volume, becomes how fast can you deliver that value to the customer and across more. So then the team grows, that feeds back in. Now you've got more change has to be controlled. And so the question shifts from how can I deal with infrastructure of dealing with volume to infrastructure of dealing with change into that system. And so that's where my focus has shifted in the current product, and it's where I'm primarily focused.
Okay. Excellent. So, Steven, it was a very great talk. A lot of topics was covered. It's almost 46 minutes, actually longer than I expected, but the information and experience you were sharing here, I just couldn't stop you. Thank you very much for your insights. Do you have something to add?
No, I appreciate the opportunity and enjoy talking technology. So
yeah, well, hopefully somebody will pick up something from our conversation for their product, company, project, and hopefully it will be shared with other people as well. Okay,
Great.
Steven, thank you very much again,
Thanks.
and I will talk to you later. Bye.
Have a good one.